Okay, class, top of the morning. We have with us today Martha Parkhurst from the MSPCA, and as you know, she will be our featured speaker at the Animal Law Symposium on the 12th of April, 9 a.m. So get a good night's sleep, Martha. And we're delighted that she agreed to come in and follow up on the case that you heard about on Tuesday from the defense counsel's perspective. We'll now hear the state's perspective as well as the MSPCA role in it, and Martha would welcome to start, your questions that you have left over from Tuesday. I know we did say the district attorney also was going to come in, but because of ethical considerations by the state, they thought it was best not to. I'm going to ask you to welcome Martha, and then I'll turn it over to Martha.
Okay, morning. We can do it one or two ways, and I know that, like I said, she said the defense attorney was in. I don't know if you want to start with questions, or I guess I'm kind of in the dark because I'm not quite sure what he presented. Because I was going to just give you the problems that we came up against, either as a matter of law or the judge's perception of it, and I can probably do that, and then you can ask questions after.
That'd be great.
One of the issues that came up was the judge has seen affirmative action cruelty and didn't feel that he put this in neglect, and he didn't feel that it rose up to being affirmative action, so that it wasn't necessarily a violation of the cruelty statute. And I think because I've had cases very similar to this, and I had one just recently, almost the exact same type of thing, but the animal had a broken leg and the bone was sticking out of it, and it didn't get care for 3 days, and it got septic and ended up dying. That person was found guilty. But that, I think for certain people, when you see pictures of that and hear of it, it's much more graphic. Although, if you'd seen pictures of the dog, and to me, it suffered for 3 to 4 weeks and died a much slower death, and it basically wasted away to nothing. So for me, that it was a no-brainer that animal suffered, and I think everyone else could figure that out, but there were certain issues. So that was one issue with the affirmative action. He also felt we overcharged, because I charged 2 counts. I should have made a copy of this, but in the law,
I'll run out if
okay.
you want and make a copy.
I'll come back to the overcharging after. And one question the judge had was, is there an affirmative duty to treat an animal? And the way the law is, it's not an affirmative duty to treat like one specific thing, but you have an affirmative duty. The law prohibits preventing the animal to suffer. So he brought up an example of, if my dog goes out and grabs a squirrel and injures a squirrel, what affirmative duty do I have to treat that squirrel? It's like, it's a wild animal. You don't have any duty to treat it. And another issue he had, and that will come back when she brings it over, is part of the law is you have charge and custody. And he couldn't, there was an issue of, did she have charge and custody? Well, she owned the animal. Obviously, she had charge and custody. So he was trying he couldn't figure out the charge and custody and a wild animal. And I don't know if anyone here thinks that there's any similarity, like that example that I brought up with, going out and injuring a squirrel. You have no duty to do anything to the squirrel. It's a wild animal. So that was one issue. And then the law, and have you guys all read the law, or did you get a copy of the law? The 272, 77? And obviously the law was originally written in 1868. It is somewhat antiquated. It is somewhat vague. Although the vagueness works for us a lot of times. It's better to have it vague. I mean, there are some statutes out there that will have, you can't shoot, you can't stab, you can't do whatever, and then what do you do when someone hangs an animal, and they didn't put that in there. So the vagueness is good, and I think it was intended to be vague and broad because then it will encompass a wide variety of animals and circumstances. It's like what gets brought up a lot is adequate shelter. And people are like, well, what's adequate shelter? But you can't get specific for each species of animal because everyone requires something different. So I think then it comes down to a reasonable person, which I guess sometimes we have trouble with reasonable people. Which is probably why I have a job, and you guys will have jobs afterwards. But those were some of the issues that came up, and then near the end, and I had a problem with this, but I mean, we all had a problem with it, the DA and I, but God got brought into the courtroom. And God doesn't belong in the courtroom. I mean, he basically was saying that it was God's plan when an animal is born and when it dies. And obviously, I don't know what he told you, he said, but I mean, that's what was said, and there were other things said, but that really has nothing to do with facts of law. So that was another issue. The overcharging, when you look at the top, 272/77/A, the animal cruelty, a lot of times we have to charge someone with A and B because if you read through it, it has the overdrive, overload, drive and overloaded, and has deprive of necessary sustenance. And then nothing else in that part of the cruelty statute related to this case. So I charged with the depriving of necessary sustenance. And then I also went to B and charged with knowing and willfully authorized, permitted to be subjected to unnecessary suffering. Because sometimes what happens is we'll have the case and they'll throw out one charge and you keep the other one. And right now, because there is no specific term for veterinary care, we use the deprive of necessary sustenance. If an animal is either sick or injured and someone fails to take it to the vet, which is what this case was. So we use the deprive of necessary sustenance, which creates a problem because depending on the definition you use, it can be anything to sustain life, but then sometimes it has anything to sustain life, food and water. So it doesn't specifically say care. So that's why there is a bill currently in legislation to add veterinary care into 272-77, which I think will help us for cases like this. I guess if you have some questions, and then, because like I said, I don't know what.
I think one of the questions that I had, and a lot of people did, was the question of an autopsy on the dog.
And why it wasn't done?
Well, yeah, because he spoke about the fact the cause of death was a question, and of course I said, well, maybe that the vet, basically looked in a clinical observation and felt it was pretty apparent, and so therefore there wasn't one.
Part of the problem was there was a delay from when she brought the dog into the shelter to when I got notified about it. So there was an issue of the dog being in the morgue for, I believe it was 6 days. So that is an issue. I did talk to a pathologist. A necropsy wasn't done at that point because when I took it to the vet that looked at it, she just did a gross necropsy. And there was no periorbital fat, there was no fat left on the dog, and obviously once it dies, if there is no fat, it's not like it's going to get any skinnier when it dies. A necropsy wasn't done after that time because most of the vets that we have, that if we do necropsies, are saying it's been too long. The other issue that comes up, and I'm hopefully going to a forensics seminar in April, right before April 12th, because animal forensics is behind people forensics. It's come a long way, and part of the problem is a lot of times we have necropsies done, and you don't get a definitive cause of death. Like some of it, I think, is the vets just don't want to go out on the line to give you a definitive cause of death. So I look back at necropsies I had done, and most of them haven't really answered the question. Could it have made him ask one less question? Probably, but that was an issue because of that.
Well, that was a huge issue for me, and don't you think that if you feel that you're going to prosecute and want to send people to jail, that you should do an autopsy regardless?
Well, I think
You don't have a duty to do that?
I think for a lot of cases you try to, but based on that one case, with it being that long of a frame, and given the history of what I was told by the defendant and having the veterinarian look at the dog, because I think part of the issue was whether it died from lack of vet care, say it was sick.
Right, but what I'm saying is that in a case like that, regardless of what you thought or the vets thought, if you were going to go to court, then wouldn't you have it done anyway and take the outcome?
Most
as
of
what
the
it
time,
was?
right, most of the time, yes. Unfortunately, I don't always make those decisions. And what happens with any prosecution is money becomes an issue. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's right. Or
The issue was that the person apparently didn't have any money, and I think it's easy, and to go after someone without any money who maybe can't defend themselves.
it had nothing to do with going after someone because they don't have any money. Hang on for a second. She wasn't prosecuted because she had no money. Can I finish? She knew about our shelter and knew that it was a resource where she could take that animal either to ask could they help her care for it, or could she surrender it to there. She did contact veterinarians. So she knew that the dog had an issue. So because she didn't have money and the dog died a slow death, I'm not supposed to prosecute her?
I didn't say that. I think like
Okay.
any prosecution, you should have had an autopsy. I think that
And
it's easy to go after someone who doesn't have money. And really then when you say, well, why don't you have an autopsy? I mean, I think they should have gotten one, regardless.
I'm not saying that, I'm not totally disagreeing with you, but that also isn't the whole crux of the case. So, but again, I think you are insinuating that I went after her because she had no money. It has nothing.
I didn't say you. I said it's pretty accepted that happens.
People get prosecuted with money or without money all the time. I mean, they violate the law, they get prosecuted. I don't ask someone what their salary is when they violated the law. Oh, well, you know what, I'm not going to prosecute you. I mean, that's just doesn't come into play.
This way, if you have a good attorney, some things don't move to like a courtroom.
Well, she had a court-appointed attorney.
Yeah, you did.
And he did a good job because she didn't go to jail, so.
Right.
Right.
And I think he was good, that's why she got off.
Because when
Otherwise,
you-
wasn't that calling for a jail? Wasn't it 2
Yes.
years?
Well,
And
animal
then-
cruelty-
And then when you do, when you're indigent, you are allowed a court-appointed,
Right.
court can
So-
appoint you one.
Right, my
Right.
only point
It-
was that for me, it was huge that an autopsy hadn't been done where it was a jail term. That was my only point. I think she was wrong, I wouldn't have done it, but that was my.
But I also don't, professionally, I don't think even if a necropsy had been done, that we would have, because I've been doing this since 1985 and had a lot of necropsies have been done, and a lot of them don't give you anything definitive. So, again,
But that would have been for the jury or judge to decide, that was my only point.
right, I'm just saying though that that's not the crux. Would it have helped? Absolutely, I agree with you. But the decision was made not to have it done based on talking to veterinarians. I'm not a veterinarian, I can only go by what they decided. So that is an unfortunate part of it. But that, again, that's one part of it, but I think even then, again, we come up with the affirmative cruelty versus neglect. That to me is a bigger issue in the law, and people have had their hands up, and I don't know who was first.
In your defense, after the prosecutor was here the other day explaining the whole issue about the autopsy, I had a personal experience when my dog died where, the vet said, for $1,500 we can narrow it down to one of 3 things. That autopsy, whether it was done or not, wouldn't have given any conclusive, diagnosis as to why the dog died. After what he had mentioned in class the other day, I actually looked it up. And many of the websites are saying that even when autopsies are conducted on animals after they die, there isn't one certain answer like with humans. It's like they can narrow it down to maybe 2 different things or 3 different reasons.
A lot of times they can narrow it down and say, you know what, it didn't have any, from the tissue we took, it didn't have any disease process going on. So most likely the cause of death was starvation. That's what you get a lot of times. But that's still not a definitive. Even when you know that it's starved to death, and I'm not this one, like I've had other ones where you know that it's starved to death because the person hasn't fed it, there's no food in the house, there's nothing in the stomach, they won't give you that, it definitely died of starvation. So it helps, but you're still not getting that definitive. And hopefully animal forensics will catch up, because it definitely helps. Can you hang on one second? I don't know.
Oh, go ahead.
Duke it out.
Conversely, the defense could have said, we want to prove that the dog had an infection, and they could have done one.
True.
So, if they really, because he said, the dog might have died of an infection. And
And-
that was their premise. So they
Right,
could have had
and that's fine, because then I'm not explaining it well, is whether it died from starvation. Say it had an infection. Well, you have a duty to prevent it from suffering. Whether that means you take it to the vet, whether it means you take it to a shelter to look for help, it died from something. It didn't die of a natural cause like old age or a quick heart attack or something. So it still would be, you deprived it of, right now all we have is the necessary sustenance. So in reality, you could say it was sick, well then you should have treated it. It died of starvation, you should have fed it. So is that making sense? So it's one or the other, you still should have done something.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the facts were clear and obvious that, for 3 weeks of a dog vomiting and having diarrhea, that's huge symptoms that there was a problem.
And losing a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I think it aims more towards like the starvation aspect, but when he tried to say that it might have cancer or whatever, no matter what, there wasn't a problem, and it was an obvious problem.
Which was acknowledged by the owner.
Exactly, I believe me, I understand.
Right, no,
that.
right, so we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody, and apparently she was college educated, I think, I was giving her a lot less credit than that. I would have said, like, even if she was maybe even less in high school, if you yourself are throwing up and having diarrhea, something's wrong with you, you're going to bring yourself to the doctor. You know that that's not normal.
It comes back to reasonable person.
Any reasonable person, I wouldn't
Right.
even give reasonable, I'd say any person would have to know that.
Well, we'll use the reasonable law term, but you had a question.
During the course of your investigation, was there any evidence to suggest that she intentionally did this, such as maybe did she possess bite marks from the dog, or her other dog have any kind of wounds that set her off? There's no evidence?
No. Nothing to say that any action by the dog would have prompted her to, say, put it, into the cellar. Unlike the one that the guys went to visit I think it was his brother, and the dog bit his son, so the guy slashed it and then took a power drill and drilled 3 holes in the dog's head and didn't kill it. It ended up being euthanized at the vet. So, actually, hang on one second.
Do you know, I don't know if you can even, what was her credibility like? Because he made it seem like she was like this poor soul who was kind of like, didn't know anything about anybody or anything, and she did this because it was what she thought was the right thing to do, and because it was, I guess, her mom or whoever she lived with had a daycare, and why you would have a pit bull and when you have a daycare in your home is beyond me, but she put it in the basement so it wouldn't spread any diseases or whatever. What was her, what were their surroundings like when you got there, or what was her credibility? Because then we found out that she was college educated, and she was on SSI, and she had a lot of things that...
That's something I'm not... You kind of got to factor that yourself. I'm not really comfortable talking about what her, I kind of got to stick to.
But did it seem like she knew that that would have been wrong, or?
Well, my feeling, yeah, from the conversation I had with her, I mean, she acknowledged she called a veterinarian, or called some veterinarians. So to me, it's like you're acknowledging that there's a problem. And she thought about going to the shelter, but didn't because she was embarrassed because the dog looked so bad. And they would think I was being cruel to it. And that's entered in the court record. So what does that tell? I mean, to me, it's like an admission of guilt. You know that something's wrong, and you have options, but you didn't use any of the options. So, you know, that's why she had options. She knew about them. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't get prosecuted because, for whatever reason, but she had options, didn't utilize it, and it took a long time for the dog to die. She violated the law. That's why she was prosecuted.
Attorney Caldwell.
Red Sox, sorry.
Attorney Caldwell, last time he said that she had another dog named Baby. And that dog was taken from her because she didn't have a license for it.
Animal control took that dog, not the MSPCA.
Okay. He said that she didn't get the dog back at the end and that it was euthanized. However, I've heard differently, and I was wondering if you could just clear that up because
Well, it's
I don't
interesting
appreciate
that he
it.
said it was euthanized because he asked me in court what had happened with the dog, and I said, I don't know, I believe it was adopted. And as far as I know, it was adopted, and it wasn't euthanized.
That's what he said the other day.
I
mean,
And he left us all traumatized. for
Yeah,
48 hours.
yeah, no one could believe that.
Well, we were
A
sitting.
perfectly good dog.
I hadn't specifically looked up the record, but a lot of times what happens if something goes up to the shelter, a lot of times they'll, if it got to a point where something's going to euthanized, a lot of times, and I've brought it in, they'll tell me. Again, animal control took the dog. I'm 99.9% sure. I will, obviously look it up, but I'm like 99.9% sure the dog got adopted out. But he did ask me in court, in front of everyone, what happened with the dog, and my answer was, as far as I know, it was adopted out. It was not euthanized. So
You said that in court.
I said that in court.
My, how things change.
It's credible.
I mean, I've been doing this since '85, and I know, there's attorneys, there's cops, there's everyone out there that lies. That's the one thing I don't do. There's a lot of stuff I might do that people don't like, I might be a little too, frank, but it's not worth it to me. And it's like, that's what happened, this is what it was, Actually, I'm sorry, the blonde,
So where is the
No.
dog?
Hold on, Jane. I'm gonna talk now.
I'm sorry.
Now, the autopsy thing to me is like a moot point because deprived of necessary sustenance is where we're at. And this woman, whether she's provided food and water, she knew and had to have known, a reasonable person would know that that dog is not absorbing any of those nutrients.
Right.
And therefore, she was not providing the necessary sustenance, no matter what that dog died of.
Right.
She took no reasonable steps.
And that's part
to
of-
ensure that.
Right, and that's part of why a decision was made. Not only some time had gone by, but a decision was made, well, it either died from starvation or it died from being sick. So either one of those, in our eyes and in what a reasonable person would think in the eyes of the law, is still a violation. So instead of doing the necropsy and probably getting something vague, it like you said, it's a moot point. I think almost everyone in here is in agreement with it really wouldn't have helped. I mean, you can harp on it because we all know someone's going to harp on take one point. So, did it open a little door for him? Sure. But it didn't matter because it was one or the other that it died of. And they're both a violation of the law.
You just left us thinking that was like a big hole in your investigation or something to that effect when he was talking to us. I think that's why the autopsy thing became such a fixation for all of us.
Right, but I think
But we're in total agreement with you.
Right, I
It
think,
wouldn't
and,
matter.
I think everyone helping explain it, so sometimes it takes 3 times to explain something in 3 different versions, but I think that's, excuse me for 1 second. Can you stand by? Green shirt, glasses, male, Reed. I don't know what I was saying. You.
I was just wondering how my colleague here found out that, or why do we think he lied? He came in here, and naturally he's an attorney, so I took him at his word. About the disposition of the other.
Because you know how the attorneys are.
unharmed dog. And so I was just curious how you found that out.
What?
That
How he
Cole
lied.
lied to us.
Well, it appears
Well,
that
no, I
way.
think
If there
we
was
should
an
find
in-court
out.
statement.
You said that you had
No, no, but you
heard
said,
from other sources.
before I said that, you said I had heard,
That was me.
You
oh.
told
No, she said,
Okay.
they
Yeah,
killed
right.
her.
And as far as I know, but like I said, and you, in the green shirt, so I don't mean to point, had, Jane? Okay. I think after that, then you want to know where the dog is, but
The point is that I agree with everything you say, and I don't think animals should be abused. But I think for the laws to change, I think we do, I don't mean you, all of us, do have to have all our ducks in a row. I think you do need an autopsy if you want to send someone to jail. I think it helps the whole process in terms of credibility and, like in this, in terms of what happened to the dog. I don't think it's okay to say, well, maybe this, maybe that. I think we need to know what happened to that dog, other dog.
but it's one of
Not
one
that
of the two.
You have to, but I'm just saying from where I stand. I think,
Yeah.
or to have a vague statute and say, well, we like it vague. How could we determine what adequate shelter is for all the, say, domestic animals? I think we do need to do that. I think if we want to be able to really move animals forward and bring.
How would you put shelter into the law to cover all domestic animals? Like how would
Well, I
you?
haven't thought about it yet, but if you just look at the volumes and volumes of statutes, I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to put in a law, people make a law for just about everything and get very
Right, but the
specific
problem
about it.
is that
I think-
new laws get put in, and old ones, sometimes they just need some additions and refining. But there is no way that you could put in adequate shelter and cover your bases for every animal, because I've dealt with emus, I've dealt with llamas, I've dealt with horses. There's a difference in shelter requirements for a dairy cow versus a beef cow. And that's the same species, they're both cows. So then you have pigs, and you have guinea pigs, and you have potbelly pigs, and you have Yorkshire pigs. I mean, it's like, I understand what you're saying, but if you also know when you get too specific, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, no, and isn't in there, it's out. You know, the same as where the commas are and the ors are.
I think that the statute was, old. I think all those things combined. The autopsy was huge for me because regardless, then it seemed that it all was, well, we think this, we think that, and really, I think it had been done.
You know, one thing he
Either
commented
way.
on here was the statute was written in the 1800s.
1868, it's been amended several times since then. Like sanitary environment was put in the, I should know this. I'm not going to give you the date, I'll have it. But sanitation was added in the, I believe it was late 70s, because I started in 85. So it's had a few little additions, and now we're looking to get veterinary care put in because necessary sustenance is vague, and it creates a problem. And we have cases where animals haven't been taken to the vet and then end up dying. And you want to charge them because the animal has suffered. So, and again, I don't know if it would have made a difference. Well, I don't think it would have made a difference even if I discharged it with B and not charged it with a necessary necessary sustenance. You had another question?
But, to your point, you still do have a medical doctor who, I assume she took the stand?
Yeah, she testified.
She testified and she wrote her evaluation of what she saw, and the dog that should be 50 pounds is now 27. It took a while for that to happen.
Right. And when you
So
talk...
even if you didn't have the dog looked at after death, other than just from a clinical perspective, you still have her opinion.
Right, a professional opinion, I can't give the professional opinion again,
But she
doing
can.
this all, right, she can, but you have no periorbital fat. The fat around your eyes is the last fat that's going to go. So you have nothing there. It means it went from the outside all the way through all the innards, and then the eyes were the last one, and there's nothing there. And when an animal dies, whatever its weight is going to stay the same. Is there going to be a slight change in the appearance of an animal? potentially a slight change was maybe some gases, but the weight is the weight. The fat was either there or wasn't there. Someone else had, maybe.
Did she ever specify what vet she called?
Couldn't remember. So I couldn't even call a veterinarian to verify, because obviously those are questions that, you ask. Someone says, I did this. Okay, well, who did you call? When did you call? What did they tell you? But it was nothing more than I called them and they told me to give it Pedialyte and Gatorade.
The thing that I had, that bothers me the most, and I brought up when he was here on Tuesday, was that in the police report, and it's in quotations, that she knew about the MSPCA, and the whole embarrassing fact, I would
Right,
never think of that. That's very odd to me. But I also asked him, he said that there was a couple places that would dispose a dog for $90, others were $30, and I wanted to know how many places she called before she got the cheapest price of disposal. When she did that, why wouldn't she call around to get the cheapest price of a vet to take the dog to, if there was a problem? And the fact that she knew about it, I can't imagine that a person would intentionally want to watch a dog suffer. I think it all comes down to finances. My belief, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I believe
go ahead.
that I
Jump
believe
out.
that. Okay, well, what I believe is that, I think that. First of all, I think she had no business taking on a dog if she didn't have the money for it. But that's besides the point. What I think is that she knew it was going to cost a lot of money, and she knew it would be cheaper to just put it in the basement and let it die, because that's, I hate to say that, but that's what I think. I think it came down to finances for her, and it wasn't a priority for her to pay for that. That's what I think.
And as far as the disposal, that I have no idea what that conversation just was, like $30, $90 to dispose of. And when she took it to the shelter, because she took it to the shelter after it was dead,
Right.
but she wasn't, the shelter runs on, like if you bring a live animal, say you can't keep your animal anymore and you have to surrender it, they ask for a donation if possible, but there is no set fee, like if you bring your animal there, you have to give $75. They'll ask for a donation if possible. Some people give us nothing, some people give you $5, some people give you hundreds of dollars. But disposal-wise, as far as I know, it's the same way. If you can give us something, but it's not. Right. It's the same as you can go to different animal shelters and give up your animal. I know there are shelters that will charge you $200 to turn in your animal, and to me, that kind of defeats the purpose of the shelter, because people are surrendering the animal either because they can't afford it, they're moving, whatever reason, and they don't have that resource. So that presents a problem. So I'm sure there are places out there that if we're called, I know there are places that would say, well, it would cost you X amount to dispose of it, or you go to a vet, you can have, if you want something euthanized, it's going to cost you $75 and maybe $100 at this. So just like anything, just attorneys charge different fees, so do shelters and veterinarians.
The other point he made was that, she couldn't open up a yellow page and see directly inside that, bring your animal to the MSPCA for free if there's a problem. That's fine. But I can't imagine, I feel as though if she called a vet, if it was me in her situation, I would call, if not my vet, surrounding vets, any vet, and say, explain the circumstances, which somebody had said that if a vet had probably known the depth of the problem, I can't imagine that they would say, just give it some Gatorade, it'll be fine. But why, I would ask for advice from somebody. I'd talk to people, I'd call vets, is there anything I can do? I can't afford, can we work out some sort of payment? If that doesn't work, is there any way, do you know of any place? Vets must know about the MSPCA.
Right.
She had,
But she knew.
right. And
You
she
saw, that was in my, obviously you saw my report. But she knew about it, acknowledged she knew about it, acknowledged she thought about calling there, didn't, because they would think I was being cruel to it. I was embarrassed. The dog was so skinny. So I'm like, okay, how much more can it get? Red Sox.
Not wanting to do it. She willfully did something. It wasn't like I couldn't do it. I tried to do it, it didn't work out. It says I did not want to bring the dog anywhere.
Right.
So that's an action,
Right, willfully and, you're right. I agree.
We only briefly talked about count 2 on Tuesday, and I sat here very quietly because I was so angry. And I'm reading this, and it says, knowingly and willfully authorizing or permitting to be subjected to unnecessary torture or suffering.
Yep.
And so two things that we heard, again, very briefly on that point, were one, Attorney Caldwell said, he made the distinction. He grew up in a very privileged environment and maybe suggested that this person didn't know any better. That was one thing. The other was this quasi-religious argument about, the nature of suffering and where does that come from. I'm wondering just how that was received in court, because I think that's insanity. I don't know if you can comment.
That was bringing God in and letting nature take its course.
I was astonished.
I agree. And obviously, I was sequestered, so I was the first one to testify. I was up there for an hour, I think. And then I was out, and then I went in for the closing after it already started, but it turned into not being a closing. So, but for the argument to be she didn't know better or didn't grow up in the same type of privileged environment really doesn't matter, and it really, for this particular case with the statement she made, she knew. So to me, it's like that's a moot point. So to me, that's like when it was said, it just doesn't make any sense.
Or is it fraud? Is it a fraudulent statement?
So, but I mean, obviously, I don't know what other things were said. I mean, all I can tell you is what I said. That's public record. And, as far as, and I think, like I said, a lot of it comes back to the judge had trouble wrapping his head around affirmative action versus feeling that the neglect didn't rise to someone being prosecuted under the law.
Ignorance of the law. There's no excuse.
Did the district attorney think that they had a slam dunk on this?
You never think you have a slam dunk. I mean, I can't comment for the DA. Right. I mean, I can't comment on the DA. I mean, obviously, I felt that it was a good case. But, I mean, anytime you go into court, I mean, I've had cases where I thought I was going to get nothing, and I had someone walk out in handcuffs. And then I've had other ones where I think I'm going to get, at least a guilty, and you get nothing.
The reason I ask is because if the DA may have saw some holes or question the statute being in question, was there a plea agreement made? Did they offer her?
Oh, that all came about beforehand, because we thought it would plead out and not go to trial. But that didn't happen.
She rejected the plea.
It was rejected.
Martha, I wonder if you would comment on the attitude of judges with respect to animal cruelty cases. Is it changing? Is there a more enlightened view? Or is it still only a few judges that you would want, or you hope to try your case in front? What's the prevailing judicial view?
I think I've seen until this one, I thought we were progressing really well. I mean, like anything, you can go in and you've got judges that with OUIs are really lenient, or they're like, no matter what, they're slamming them. So everyone has, even though they're supposed to be impartial, a lot of judges have, partialities. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this since '85. We've worked really hard to get animal cruelty taken seriously, get our department taken seriously, get these cases into court, and get things changed. And I think we have made a lot of headway. But I think sometimes too, it's almost depending on what part of the state you're in. Like I handle the North Shore, so I have Lawrence Court, Haverhill Court, Lynn, Lowell, Rockport, Gloucester, Salem, Peabody. I probably missed a couple others. Newburyport, thank you. So even amongst my North Shore little community, there can be differences. But I think overall, judges are taking these more seriously. And DAs, I have And a lot, how the DAs switch all the time, so you go in and you find a new DA, but I a lot of times have DAs almost like fighting to take my cases. They want the cases and it's good, so we spend more time than a regular police department because these cases aren't your norm. So we spend a lot of time educating them and putting files together, and there's a lot more DAs, even if they've left and gone somewhere else, that you can call and put a DA in touch with them about that, and you gather jury instructions for all the cruelty cases, because there are no specific jury instructions for cruelty cases. So it's a lot of, as the cases come up, you're putting all the motions together and just learning from one case to another. But I have found that, and defense attorneys come up to me. I have 2 in Lowell Court. They just come up and thank you so much for what you do, and I would never prosecute. I would never defend someone that abuses animals. And I don't think they ever say that to a cop that with a child abuser. They don't say that, but people come up and say, I would never defend someone that is cruel to animals. So it's sort of increased in the spread of it, and I think a lot more people are offended by it.
2 quick comments. It's interesting you brought up Lowell, because I was going to ask you, you had a very successful prosecution out there with the dog ears.
Oh, the one where they cut the dog ears off, yep.
And it received, and the Lowell Sun, or whatever people may or may not think about the Lowell Sun, they do a great job in covering all of the animal abuse cases, I think.
Right, we have them, and I had a big horse case. I've had a couple big horse cases out there. I had a big dog case out there, and they're right there, sometimes to the point of just because I really don't like to talk to the press.
Media,
And you have to be really careful, because then I've been on, interviewed. They came into the courtroom for one of my cases, and I didn't know that they were there, and I kept sinking behind the DAs and, trying to pan out, and then I tried to walk out. Because I just, and they cut it. They did that cut right at this, and I was like, you need the next sentence, which they're famous for. So, but at least it's getting some press, and you just hope that the average person is reasonable and realizes that. Has anyone here ever been interviewed and quoted in the paper or on TV?
Yes.
How many times is it accurate?
Rarely, and I'm told.
Or full,
just so you know this, because I actually was interviewed with a friend of mine who's an attorney, and she said, in the future, you have this, agreement with them that you are going to review first what they're going to quote in there, and
Right.
so that you know exactly.
Right.
Because it's exactly true. They say half of what you say, they make you look like an idiot sometimes.
Right.
Or,
They cut off the last sentence. Oh, we don't have that extra two seconds for you to finish the sentence. And people are like, I'm like, no, this is what I said. I said that.
I spent a lot of years on a town board, and I used to read the paper the next day to see how I was misquoted.
Yeah. And it's
Because that's what used to happen.
right. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people believe everything in the paper or on the news. And so you just, I guess in one way at least we get the press, so it's out there, but sometimes you just go.
I remember watching you address us on the first Animal Law Day, and it seems as though you haven't really gotten any more help if you're covering all of these towns. I don't know how you do it.
Well, there's 9 in the department, and that's not going to change anytime soon.
To cover all those courts has to be very difficult.
It has its moments. It is, you get used to it. I'd rather be busy than not, but yeah, it can be trying to juggle, like, oh, I got to go up here, and oh, I have a new DA in this court, and, but certain ones I have now, I'm like, oh, great, I don't even have to go to court. I can call them and say, hey, this is what we're looking for, and, this is what would take, and then they can plead it out, and, they have my number if I need to, but, because a lot of times you have to go sit in court because something might happen, and they want to know, can you plead it out now, and if we haven't talked to them. So.
Do you think your reception is better now with some of the DAs, and they're becoming a little more attuned to these cases versus a number of years ago?
Yeah, I would say, there were always some, because the other thing is, a lot of times, you're taking the most egregious cases to court. like, because there is no fining system for the cruelty statute. So say someone has a dog, pick that as an example, out without any type of shelter, and it's in the middle of the winter. So you go out and, they're there, you tell them what they need to do, you warn them of the laws, say this is what you need to do. The dog isn't suffering any, ill effects at that point, you're no signs of frostbite. It's not like really skinny or anything, it's just, so then you go back and they haven't done it. It's like, that's the type of thing, if you brought something like that to court without the dog having any type of injury or suffering some malady from it, I don't think we still would get anywhere, especially now with it being a felony. So you really have to get inventive. I mean, sometimes it means getting a doghouse for someone and putting the doghouse out there for them, because it is not going to do it. Okay, get the doghouse and, hope for the best. And obviously we're talking, again, adequate shelter for a pit bull is not going to be the same as adequate shelter for a Malamute. Adequate shelter for a puppy shouldn't be out in the middle of the winter. You know what I mean? So even different dogs, and the condition of the dog, the age of the dog, and the breed of the dog is going to be different. I mean, Huskies and Malamutes are going to be sitting out in the top of the snowbanks like, woohoo, it's snowing, and hang out and not use the doghouse. They may use it. They would probably use it in the summer. But a lot of the shelter calls we get are trying to get people. They have no shelter, and I've gone to houses in the middle of the summer that have a doghouse in the driveway, in the sun, and they go, well, I got a doghouse. Put your head in the doghouse. What? I said, put your head in the doghouse. So they put their head in the doghouse, and then they realize, I'm like, it's 500 degrees in there. So the dog is either sitting in the doghouse or he's like on the cement. So common sense, and they kind of look at it and go, oh, I say it needs shade. More than a doghouse, it needs shade. So take this doghouse, and it's like a lot of what we do is educating, because common sense, would you put a doghouse someplace where if your dog is out 24/7, which the law allows if it's provided with all these things, are you going to put it somewhere where the dog can't see what's going on? No, you got to place it so if the dog wants to be in the doghouse, it can still see who's coming on its property. And again, I've been doing this, so I just think, how do they not know this? So you need to place the doghouse here and put it under trees so in the summer it has shade, 'cause it's not going to use the doghouse, and, just simple little things that I think, I'm assuming everyone in here, has enough sense that you would know that. So that's a lot of what we come across, and that's part of the frustrating part with the law is adequate shelter. It's great that it's become a felony, but it's almost like some parts should probably still be a misdemeanor or have a fining system. I mean, a fining system would be great, but that entails a whole, that entails a lot to get a fining system in. And, maybe someday, probably not while I'm still doing this, but maybe we'll start something. Go ahead.
Well, that's a good point, because actually I didn't know that, that you could leave the dog outside in the doghouse 24/7, because it seems to me that's really inhumane. Not just as inhumane as this girl, but I would say that's very inhumane to leave.
Well, if you have a
And
doghouse,
that's what the law is, which I didn't count. So I think we do have to work on all those.
well, if it's adequate shelter, meaning it's a doghouse that has some sort of insulation, it has some sort of bedding in there. It's being fed enough so it's got good weight on it. I mean, there are dogs,
But don't you think that's stretching it? I wouldn't do that, would you? I mean, I don't think anybody would really do that.
oh, people do it all the time.
You can make the other argument, though.
Leave it up.
Keeping a dog in the house all day long is inhumane.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
right,
So it's,
right.
and so it is okay for a lot of dogs if if it's warm and dry, and we're talking most of the time nowadays, it's dogs that have fur on them. Although in some of my bigger cities that have a prevalence of pit bulls, they think that that's the cool thing to do. Although more of them now move them into basements. That is no better, because you go in these stone basements and I walk in, my eyes water because of the urine smell. But they're warm.
But you're saying that's adequate shelter as far as the law goes.
What is?
Situations like that.
In a basement with
Outside or
urine
in a
smell?
basement, yeah.
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying,
Oh, that-
what I'm saying is that if it's in a basement, then in a urine smell and there's feces and stuff, that's not going to be adequate, because then you come into the sanitation issue, and that would be considered a violation. Outside, if it's like a shepherd, a husky, a Malamute, something that's got hair, and it's been like that all year. It's not like you just stuck it out there. It acclimates. It grows fur. It acclimates. It's in a dog. It has a doghouse that it can go to when it uses it. Usually we tell people to put straw in it. You know, they'll put blankets and they pull it out. Most of the time you put straw. They can burrow up in it. You're feeding them enough, and you check with the water, because water becomes an issue. It freezes. It can be okay if it's adequate weight. Obviously, you know, I had one years ago in one of my towns where it was a Dalmatian. He put the dog out in January, and it froze to death in the doghouse. And he got tired of having it in the house because it was peeing in the house, peeing and pooping, because he didn't have time for, bottom line is he didn't have time for the dog. He should have surrendered the dog. It was emaciated. Yep.
Oh, good. Was he found guilty?
He was found guilty. It was back when it was misdemeanor. He was found guilty. He was fined. And he did 6 days in jail. And that was back in early 90s probably. So, but it's an emaciated Dalmatian, so it has no body fat to keep it warm. It hasn't been out there, it's January, it has no fur, and he put it out there because he was, you know, perturbed at it. So common sense, just give it away. Give it to a shelter or whatever. So it, you know, that died a horrible death.
Arthur, did you observe the basement where this dog was found? What was that like? Is it?
It would be adequate. I mean, it wasn't, if the dog had been healthy, it would have been fine.
Okay.
Bottom line.
One thing wasn't so bad as far as the dog had been supposedly vomiting and.
Was it a finished?
Right. Well, no.
So it was like
No,
cause.
but was it cleaned up
Right. Well, and again, I was there
after? Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
right after the landing was ripped up. So.
The question, it was so lethargic, were they even walking the dog? The dog was that lethargic, it probably wasn't being walked because it couldn't walk, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm sorry. Can I ask something?
Jump right in.
I will. Is there a way for you to track the continuing saga of Baby, the other supposedly helper? Hey, can you get back to me?
I will do that and let Diane know the saga, the ending saga of Bebe. Yeah, I can find out.
Bebe was in good shape. Is that true? That it was.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, bottom line is, and again, animal control took it because it wasn't licensed, and then she didn't get it back because she didn't, whatever happened with animal control, she didn't get it back, whatever. And that was, you know, he tried to say, well, she had another dog and it was fine. I didn't charge her with that dog, and if that dog had gotten sick, what would happen with that dog?
Right, he told us he thought that helped his case a lot, right?
I don't remember him saying that. But.
Oh, that because it was.
That helped his case a lot, that she did have another dog that was in good shape, and he felt that it did help his case in terms of her not getting convicted.
Yes, he did say that.
And, I mean, to me, it doesn't, I understand where he's coming from, but it still doesn't matter. But, you know, obviously, the way it was portrayed, and again, you know, you start when you have someone that, from the get-go, is saying, I don't think this affirmative cruelty, that this rises to affirmative cruelty. So you're right from the get-go, forgetting even the law, just thinking that the only things that are cruel to animals are going to be if they're shot or stabbed or have the broken leg, that, you know, the bones are sticking out or something. Thinking that that's the only thing that would be considered cruelty under the law and something to be prosecuted. So that's a problem right there. So whether that dog was healthy or not, it, you know.
Well, he put it towards intent, her intent. She intended.
You don't have to have intent in Massachusetts. No, if you, Commonwealth versus Magoon, which I don't have a copy of it, but it's one of the antiquated laws that we always go back to, but you can read it.
Any final questions?
I just wondered if you could speak to the appeal on the question of law. That it seems to be the defendant's motion to report a question of law to the appeals court. said he.
Don't know anything about that. Really?
What?
He's appealing a not guilty?
Exactly.
Somebody asked him about that the other day, and he went, and he started to talk about, and then he switched gears, so I didn't know what that meant. He was, why he would do that?
News to me, and that's, why would you appeal something when you have a not guilty? I don't know. He gave you something, or that was what he verbally said? Did he give you guys anything? Oh, on his, is that the,
I think he said he filed the motion, but he withdrew the motion.
He talked at the beginning about the jury trial versus we've been, yeah.
with jury, and there was a motion to suppress that I testified at for 45 minutes, and then he withdrew it.
So he withdrew the
He withdrew
motion.
after, because he,
Press what? What evidence? What did he?
photographs, and the,
He didn't want any pictures of the dog, I remember that.
right.
It's prejudicial.
Yeah, well, I mean.
But, I mean, photographs get used in every case. Right. But yeah, so he was going to lose the motion, so he withdrew it.
That's what he said, yeah.
He said he did.
He said he got the photos excluded?
Yeah.
He said he got the photos
Yeah,
he did.
Yes, as prejudicial. but-
He did say he withdrew the motion, and the photos were excluded. I mean.
Oh, no, we entered photos.
Yeah,
He brought
did
photos
say
up.
that.
The DA brought photos up to me and said, "Do you recognize this?" I said, "Yes." "Who took this?" "I did." "What is this fairly represent the dog in question when you saw it?" "Yes." Marked as exhibit, I don't know what they did, numbers or letters. How about this picture? Oh, no, photos were entered.
Did he think that we weren't gonna talk to anybody?
Violating
I-
the model rules of
All right, well, everybody thank Martha for making this time. Greatly appreciated.